Hey, I'm Dave Spencer with VTScada, and in this video we'll be setting up secure access to a VTScada internet server. We'll start off with the basic internet client configuration, which is done within VTScada. So before we get going on this, we'll want to make sure that our users have the right or the privilege to connect to the internet server. In order to do that, I'll click up in my user here. My application is already secured with a number of users. I'll go into the accounts, and I'm going to set up this privilege for the Dave user. Now, if you wanted to set up many users at once, you could set up one of these roles to have the privilege that I'm adding. However, in this case, we're just going to do it for a single user. So for Dave, I will click the choose a privilege, and I'm going to choose the internet client access privilege. Click OK there and apply that. And now Dave should have the ability to connect through a thin client. Next up, we're going to configure the VTScada internet client server. So in here, normally you wouldn't see any of these realms, but I do have a few realms configured here already. But what we'll do is click on add to add a new realm. And in this case, we're going to call that realm apps. We're also going to leave that realm on port 80 and not have SSL at this time, and we'll secure it later when we talk more about connections from the public internet. So we'll click OK. And we're going to want to add our application to this realm. So we'll click the Hydro demo application, which I have running in the background, and then we'll go over to the server setup. Now in the server setup, I want to add the local machine because I want to be able to access the server from inside of my controlled network or from a VPN who's giving me access to my network. So I'm just going to put in the host name here and port 80, so there's no SSL or anything on this. And then we're also going to add in a server for our public IP addressable domain, which will point to this server. Now, again, we're going to leave this on port 80 for now, and we'll secure it later. It's important to note, too, that in order to access this computer from a public IP, you'll want to set up a static IP with your ISP and also configure your port forwarding so that inbound connections on the port you've chosen point to the server. So in this case, we're going to apply those settings, and then you'll see that we've got two servers in our server list, both point to the same machine. VTScada provides three types of internet server, each optimized for a different type of user. First up is the VIC, which is optimized for a user on a Windows PC or laptop who regularly connects to VTScada. Next up is the MIC, which is the ultralight client, which takes a VTScada page and turns it into a list of tags with values and still allows for some trending. Finally, VTScada offers the Anywhere client, which allows for any VTScada page to be rendered in an HTML5 compliant browser and also offers the ability to do trending and download reports. Next, we'll test our VTScada thin client configuration by trying a connection to the Anywhere URL. So when we're presented with a page like this, you can see that our internet server is running, but we're just using HTTPS right now with no type of encryption on the traffic. So someone using something like Wireshark would be able to snoop on my post here when I go to log in. So if we're doing anything public, we'll definitely want to lock that down with TLS. So if I expand my page here after I've logged in, you can see I'm running the Edge browser, logged into my VTScada application, and I have a viewport that looks very much like we did in the thick client. I can still do things like click to trend, I can change the time frame, query the historian, and also do things like add to the trend, very much like I could in the thick client. So this completes the setup that we need for a controlled network or connecting through a VPN. But if we want to connect from the public internet, we'll need to secure the application, and we'll explain that coming up. Before we can secure our application, we'll need to get a domain name to attach to the SSL certificate. For this example, we'll head over to GoDaddy.com to get the SSL certificate as well as the domain name. So to start off, make sure that you are logged in or that you get an account with GoDaddy, and then you can go right at the top here and search for the domain that you'd like to have for your SCADA server. So in this case, I'm looking SCADA for Life, and you see a typo there, and it's because I've already purchased it and I want to see it as available. So let's move over to Continue to Cart. Now we'll be prompted with some options here before we actually get to the cart. And the first one is privacy protection. We can say no thanks to that because it's just for the whois protection. That's not for SSL or anything like that. And also we do not want to start our free website because we're going to point this domain to our VTScada server. Now at this point, it's pretty straightforward. You're prompted to have a credit card or something. The organization there is just for your billing purposes, and you can pick the term that you want to pay for. In this case, I've really just doing this for this webinar. So we'll just pick 1 year and I can complete my purchase. Next up, we're going to go through a very similar process to purchase a token for a SSL cert. So at this time, we're not necessarily purchasing the cert itself, but we're actually purchasing the ability to create a cert using GoDaddy. So in this case, I'm going to just say protect one website because I've only got the one URL that I'm looking for. And you can see that it's showing some promotional pricing. After this, it's roughly $99 a year to keep the cert active. Now we're just looking for a standard domain validation SSL cert. You know, there is other types of elevated verification of your domain. But in this case, we're really just looking to use the cert to encrypt our traffic. So domain verification is more than enough. In the term length, again, I'm going to pick a short length because I'm really just doing this for the webinar. So as before, we're prompted to go through our cart here. So I'll put in the organizational name. I've already selected the MasterCard I wish to pay with, and I've picked a term of 1 year, and I'm also only purchasing one certificate. If we were to have dual servers, we would perhaps want to purchase 2 certificates here. So next up, we're going to go into the SSL cert, and now you can see that we've got one cert here that is yet to be set up, but is available and we sent out a certificate request. So next up, we're going to configure our domain to point to the VTScada server. In this case, I'm over in the domain manager in GoDaddy, and I will scroll down to the bottom here and click on Manage DNS. This is where we can set up our A records to point to the right place. Now the first one is I've got my A record here with the @ under the host, and that's just going to say that we're pointing straight on our URL, and that's going to point to the IP address of the VTScada server. And the TTL here, I'm just going to pick something arbitrary at like a half hour or something. It's not really that important because we're not updating the record very often. We do have a static IP. So I'll save that. And then next up, I'm also going to add another A record. And this is going to be the one that will point to the VTScada server and set up with SSL. So I'm going to add an A record here. In the host, this time I'm going to put the VTScada host name, and that's going to be VTS Demo 2. And that's going to point to the same IP address, which is, again, the IP address that we're using to connect to our SCADA server. And in the TTL, we'll add that to be probably a half hour again. So once we've got this set up, now we're going to generate a SSL cert request using VTScada. And so we'll go back to our VTScada machine here, and we're going to open up the internet client configuration. And into the server here, you can see that the vtsdemo2.scadaforlife.com doesn't yet resolve to our address, and that's okay. We've just configured the DNS. So what we'll want to do is fill in all the information here, and I've done this but you want to put in your information and your host plus domain name, and then click generate request. So this is now copied a request to your clipboard. So I'm just opening up Notepad here, and I'll paste the request in. So you should have something with begin cert request, end cert request, and you're going to leave that in your clipboard. And eventually we'll go back to GoDaddy and paste that in as a CSR request. So with that information in my clipboard, I'm going to go to set up my certificate, input as a CSR, and then we're going to paste that request here. So just bring this over, make sure I've got the whole thing from begin and end. And then we'll verify that that's for vtsdemo2.scadaforlife.com, and we can click continue. And then to prove domain control, we don't want to send an email out because we don't have an MX server. We don't have a mail server set up. So we'll select to add a TXT record to our DNS. And that really just proves that we control the DNS as well as the cert. And in this case, because we're using GoDaddy for both options, we don't actually need to prove that we own the domain. They're able to do that based on the fact it's the same account for both. So you see here, if you did it like me, then you'll see you don't need to do anything. And if you refresh this page, then you'll be given the ability to download your certificate. So there we go. So I've refreshed the page, and now I'm going to click the download button. And after I do that, I'm going to be prompted with some options here. So I'm going to elect to download my certificate for IIS, which is the Windows server setup configuration. And not that we really need it in this format. Other would also work, because we're just going to open the cert and do this manually in this example. But it's a good practice, because if you do know how to install a certificate under your own method, then you can probably just do that from this point. So we'll open our zipped file here and extract the cert. And you can see the 3 files that I have here. It's really this top one, which is the certificate response that we're going to use to put into VTScada to put the cert into the Windows Cert Store. So now I've got my folder here, and I'm going to open that with Notepad. Again, copy from begin certificate to the end certificate, and copy that into my clipboard, and then go over to the VTScada Internet Client configuration in the SSL certificate tab. And now I'm going to click process reply, and that's going to take the certificate that's in my clipboard and send that back into VTScada. Next up, we're going to open the Microsoft Management Console. You hit the Windows key and type MMC for that. And then we're going to add a viewport here for certificates. Now the first one we're going to do is for my user account. And so we can finish that and click OK to see the certificate. And we should see the one that VTScada just placed in the Windows Store here. So I'll go into Personal and Certificates. And you can see the very bottom one there is VTS Demo 2, SCADAforlife.com. And it expires a year from the time that I did this. So next up, we're going to export this certificate because we're going to make a backup of it. And so we do want to delete the private key if the export's successful, and then we'll re-import that with a new key. I elected to password protect this file when I did this, so you can choose to do that or not to do this. It's really up to you, but I wanted to leave it in an accessible place, so I put a password in to prevent it from being misused. So I just confirm my password here, and we'll be able to click next as we carry on through the wizard. So here we just pick a file name where we want to export to, and I'll click next and finish to end the export here. Okay, now that the export was successful, I can delete the certificate from the Cert Store because I'm going to bring it in again. So I'm going to relaunch MMC just to start with a fresh viewport because this time we're going to add a snap in another certificate, but we're going to do it for the local machine. So I'm going to go computer account and say local computer and OK to this. And now if I drop down certificates, and we'll import into personal the certificate that we just created. So I'll go all tasks, import, and next. And now we'll point to the location of the certificate. In my case, it's just on the desktop here. So I'll go down, grab that cert. Next, we'll type in the password that I generated to protect that cert. So we go next to this. And now we're going to place it in this location in the Windows Store. So now if I go into Personal and look at the certificates, you'll see that that cert is right down in the bottom here. And again, that it's still valid for the next year. So now we're going to go into Manage Private Keys. And in this place, we'll need to add the current user or the VTScada user into this. So I'll put in the user that we have here, which is Trihedral in my case. And we'll make sure that that user has read access to the cert. So next up, I'm going to double click the cert to open the properties, and then we're going to go into the Details tab. And then we're going to go down here to Subject, because we want to look at the value here, CN. And we're going to take that. It should really just be something pretty straightforward here, like the domain. We're going to take that and we're going to copy it, and then we're going to have to paste that into VTScada in our setup.ini file. So if you bring up Explorer, go to your VTScada installation directory, and then scroll down to a file called setup.ini. And we can open that in Notepad, or really if you have some other program that you want to use to view it, then you can use basically anything like Visual Studio Code. But in this example, we're using Notepad. In this case, we're going to scroll down here, and just above themes here, we're going to add in a property, and that property is going to be SSL Cert name, and we'll equal that, or set that equal to vtsdemo2.scadaforlife.com, which, if you recall, was the value of CN. So once we're done there, we'll save that, and then we'll close this and close out of the Cert store here, and we'll have to restart VTScada to relaunch that using the new setup.ini file. So moving ahead a little bit here, we're going to set up the SSL ports now that we have everything installed. So I've kind of jumped ahead. I've restarted VTScada, and now we're going to go into the server configuration, and we're going to go to our realm and modify that to change to port 443 with SSL, and go into the server setup and do the exact same thing. So we'll OK that. And next up, we'll test the URL here. And you can see this time when we test it, we're seeing that we do have a valid certificate, which means that when we post our login, we'll be encrypted traffic. Thanks very much for your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with us.